Baylor has driven progress in health and medicine through research, education, and care that push the frontiers of modern science.
Over on 90 headed in, South Post Oak, trying to clean up an accident. 96 for the high. Slight chance of some afternoon showers. Going to feel like 107. So, again, don't forget about your pets. Make sure they have shade all day, fan, a lot of water. It's going to feel like almost 110 or so, 79 for the low. 96 for Friday, 30% chance of some showers, and then upper 90s weekend going into Monday. Right now, we're at 85 here at the University of Houston. Listen anywhere we're streaming live online. It's KUHF Houston News 88.7. A service at the University of Houston. Houston Matters starts right now. Stick around. It's 9 o'clock.
City of Houston voters will decide whether to ban no-knock warrants and direct police to consider low-level marijuana possession their lowest enforcement priority. I'm Craig Cohen. Today on Houston Matters, why Houston City Council Wednesday approved those measures going on the November 3rd ballot.
Houston Matters with Craig Cohen is a production of Houston Public Media with support from Baylor College of Medicine.
Also this hour, getting back to the moon was one thing. Building a base there and then doing the same someday on Mars and, living there? That's something else entirely. We'll discuss. Plus, younger people are drinking less, so are we seeing fewer instances of alcohol-related health issues? And we meet a pair of Houston filmmakers who want to highlight Houston's soccer culture. Thanks for joining us on News 88.7. Remember, check out our live video feed on Houston Public Media's YouTube channel. We'll start with a news update from NPR and News 88.7. Stay with us.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. Democratic lawmakers are calling for an investigation into conditions aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln. The aircraft carrier has spent more than 200 straight days at sea during its extended deployment in the Middle East. Military families have reported food and supply shortages, broken plumbing, and worsening mental health among the crew. Some sailors have reportedly tried to jump overboard, prompting calls for an official inspection. NPR has not independently confirmed this story, which was first reported by Navy Times Stars and Stripes. The Navy disputes reports of an increase in suicide attempts and says mental health support is available aboard the ship. Stocks on Wall Street opened higher this morning as the Labor Department reported more modest inflation at the wholesale level. NPR's Scott Horsley reports the Dow Jones Industrial Average rose about 190 points in early trading.
Prices at the wholesale level are climbing more slowly now, much like prices at the retail level. A new report from the Labor Department shows wholesale prices in July were up 4.7% from a year ago. That's a smaller annual increase than the 5.5% jump for the 12 months ending in June. Wholesale prices were flat between June and July. The news is likely to be welcomed by inflation fighters at the Federal Reserve, although prices are still climbing faster than the central bank would like. Investors are betting the Fed will feel less pressure to raise interest rates when policymakers meet next month. Still, bond markets are signaling that other interest rates on things like mortgages may go higher. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
The U.S. Treasury Department says it refunded another $30 billion in tariffs last month, bringing the total to $115 billion. NPR's Emily Fang reports the refunds follow a Supreme Court ruling against the Trump administration's method of collecting the duties.
Tariffs are a key part of President Trump's economic toolkit. But by the end of last month, the U.S. had refunded a good chunk of them, $115 billion, out of the approximately $166 billion in tariffs wrongfully collected under an interpretation of trade law the Supreme Court struck down this February. The Trump administration then rolled out a new round of tariffs on about 60 countries last month, which it alleged were exporting some goods made with forced labor. But earlier this month, a coalition of 25 U.S. states sued the administration over those new tariffs, arguing they are an attempt to simply replace the customs duties already struck down. Emily Fang, NPR News, Washington.
Rescue crews in western Colombia are searching for survivors after Monday's powerful earthquake. At least 265 people are dead. This is NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Jarl and Pamela Moan. focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts. And the Public Welfare Foundation, committed to advancing transformative youth and criminal justice reforms.
Live from News 88.7 in Houston, I'm Matt Harab. Fort Bend County commissioners will discuss increasing property tax rates for the next fiscal year during Commissioners Court today. But as News 88.7's Melissa Anahe reports, a final vote could face hurdles.
During public hearings scheduled for next month, commissioners will propose raising the property tax rate above last year's rate. But the biggest question heading into the final vote on September 10th is whether commissioners will have enough members present to approve the tax increase. Democratic Commissioners Grady Prestige and Dexter McCoy have been absent since June. They want interim county judge Daniel Wong, a Republican, to step down as the civil case contesting his appointment proceeds in court. Without 4 elected commissioners required to levy a tax, the court would lack a quorum and couldn't adopt the higher rate, forcing a no new revenue rate. Under that budget, elected officials and county employees wouldn't see pay increases, and capital improvement projects and services could be scaled back. From the Fort Bend County Bureau, I'm Melissa Nahe, News 88.7.
A 31-year-old man has been charged with unlawfully carrying a handgun inside of Toyota Center last night. Police say that Joshua Biosa's decision shut down the Don Toliver concert only about 10 minutes early, though. Concert goers were told to leave the building immediately. Tropical storm Cristobal is churning more than 1,000 miles away from Bermuda in the central Atlantic. This storm will not impact land. Behind it, though, are 2 systems coming off the coast of Africa. The exact tracks are still unclear. However, they both have a decent shot at developing into tropical depressions or storms. The good news is the systems are expected to face tough atmospheric conditions as they head west, which could prevent or limit any impacts on the United States. And today is Houston Mayor John Whitmire's 77th birthday. He says he plans to seek a second 4-year term next year.
We have started something special in the city of Houston. We're not going to finish it till the end of my second term.
If reelected, he would be 82 years old at the end of his second term. I'm Matt Harab, News 88.7.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Good morning. Thanks for joining us here on News 88.7 and Houston Public Media's YouTube channel. Coming up this hour, for Houston's aerospace community, getting back to the moon was one thing. Setting up a base there, living there, then doing the same thing on Mars, well, that's quite another. Also, are changes in drinking behavior impacting Houstonians' health in a good way? Plus, area filmmakers set their sights on highlighting Houston's soccer community. First, though, on Wednesday, Houston City Council approved placing 2 measures on the November 3rd ballot involving how Houston police operate. One would ban no-knock warrants outright. The other would make low-level marijuana possession the department's lowest enforcement priority. Dominic Anthony Walsh covers City Hall for Houston Public Media. He joins us now with more. Good morning, Dominic.
Good morning, Craig.
Why are these 2 measures going on the November ballot?
Yeah, so an organization called Ground Game Texas, a progressive advocacy organization, submitted a petition with more than 40,000 signatures to get the measure with both of these items on the ballot. It's about 15,000 more than is required under city code to force a matter like this onto the ballot. And so the city council, in kind of a ministerial move, approved the ballot referendum on Wednesday.
Why did this organization say they sought those petitions to get these 2 particular questions on the ballot?
Right, so I spoke with the executive director of Ground Game Texas, and she told me that especially with the marijuana measure, that it's about bringing equity to the city. She pointed to an ACLU Texas report from a few years ago finding Black people are more than 2 times as likely to be arrested for cannabis possession than white people in Texas. When it comes to the no-knock warrant ban, she said this is just good policy. She pointed to the death of Breonna Taylor during a no-knock raid in Louisville, Kentucky a few years ago, as well as the notorious Harding Street drug raid here in Houston.
Yeah, I remember that. It's been 7 years now since that happened in Southeast Houston. It turned into a deadly shootout. For those who don't know, we always have new folks moving to town remind everybody what happened.
Right. This was a drug raid gone wrong. 5 officers were wounded, and they shot and killed homeowners Dennis Tuttle and Regina Nicholas. The raid was later revealed to have been based on a fabricated warrant, and it also shone light on the proliferation of no-knock tactics, which HPD, under former Mayor Sylvester Turner, then restricted, but they did not ban no-knock tactics outright.
And do we know precisely what this ballot measure will say, what it's asking voters to decide?
So the petition language from Ground Game Texas is much more stringent than current policy. It would require officers to, quote, knock and announce their presence and wait at least 15 seconds prior to execution for all search warrants.
Mayor Whitmire commented on this Wednesday. What do you have to say?
Yeah, he said this is already a policy in HPD. The department does not use no-knock warrants anymore. And if that's true, it's not really formally written, publicly available as a general order for the police department. Under the most recent policy in the form of an executive order issued back in 2020, officers are prohibited from executing no-knock warrants unless the warrant has been approved in writing by the HPD chief of police. An HPD spokesperson declined to answer further questions about the policy.
And I guess maybe that also means declining to answer whether or not the police chief has, in fact, signed off on some of those.
Correct.
Yeah. What did the mayor have to say about the marijuana measure?
He said, quote, low-level marijuana has not been a priority in, quite frankly, a long time. Under a program operated by the Harris County District Attorney's Office, which prosecutes crimes including marijuana possession, officers already have the ability to divert people from jail into community supervision and a cognitive class. An HPD spokesperson on this question declined to provide figures on cannabis-related arrests over recent years. They referred us to the weeks-long public records request process.
Do we know the language that'll be on that measure on the ballot?
Yeah, so the petition calls for HPD to make misdemeanor cannabis possession its, quote, lowest possible enforcement priority.
Dallas and Austin have passed similar measures involving marijuana. Both drew lawsuits from the state attorney general's office. Is Houston likely headed for a similar legal fight?
Well, Attorney General Ken Paxton's office did not respond to a request for comment. The executive director of Ground Game Texas told me they do expect a potential legal challenge, and they crafted this petition language slightly differently than the ones passed in other cities with legal challenges in mind.
In some other developments, some Houston airport workers are going to see their wages increase under a new executive order. Mayor Whitmire announced Wednesday workers' pay will eventually reach $23 an hour come 2028. Which workers does this impact?
A lot of workers at both of the city's airports, many of whom are represented by the Texas chapter of the Service Employees International Union, SEIU. They work across passenger service, cleaning, and baggage operations. This order requires vendors and contractors at the airports to meet the new wage standards. A spokesperson for SEIU told me the union expects this wage hike to benefit more than 35,000 workers.
In 2025, there was this 40-day strike at Hilton America's Houston Hotel, led to better pay for workers there. Then there was a strike authorization, which led to raises for George R. Brown Convention Center workers. Bush Airport Airline Lounge workers got raises after all of that as well. So is this order from Whitmire, is that part of the ripple effect of all of that?
It definitely continues this string of wins at city-owned facilities. The hotel and convention center you mentioned are owned by the city. And Mayor Whitmire yesterday described himself as the strongest ally unions have ever seen in the mayor's office. With the Hilton situation, he previously said he threatened to withhold city business from Hilton unless they gave the Unite Here union a fair deal. He said, quote, "As strong as our city is, it's only as strong as our workers are. Organized labor works."
In another matter, Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers detained a man in Houston last weekend after he called the Houston Police Department to report a shooting in a Home Depot parking lot. What happened there?
Whitmire told reporters yesterday that officers were responding to reports of a shot fired, and when they arrived, ICE was already there. In a statement to us, Harris County District Attorney Sean Tier said ICE's detainment of this witness could dissuade future witnesses to crimes from contacting law enforcement. It's unclear how the man ended up in ICE custody, but this broader question of HPD's cooperation with ICE continues to draw scrutiny.
Last month, HPD released its first mandatory report on coordination with ICE. Can you remind us what the current policy is for HPD's interactions with ICE?
Yes, HPD must contact ICE when they encounter someone with an immigration warrant under current policy, and officers can hold people a reasonable amount of time waiting for the agency to respond. One of the other new policies this year is that HPD must provide quarterly reports on this interaction, which is what they recently released.
And you reviewed the data in that. Anything catch your eye?
Yeah, we obtained additional documents shedding light on the stories behind the data, and one of those cases definitely caught my eye. A woman in North Houston called 911 to report a man threatened to kill her. She had an immigration warrant. HPD reported her to ICE, and the incident report we obtained doesn't state whether she was detained by federal immigration agents. We saw in the data that 34 of the calls from HPD to ICE came from someone who came after someone asked emergency responders for help, and it's unclear how many of those incidents mirrored the one in April when the person requesting emergency services was reported to ICE. Altogether, more than 100 calls over this 4-month period.
Finally, during press gaggle yesterday, you asked Mayor Whitmire about his impending birthday and its implications for what's become a popular subject these days, politics and age. What did you have to say?
Right. Today is Mayor Whitmire's 77th birthday. If reelected, he would be 82 at the end of his second term. I asked him about this, and he said he is one of the hardest workers at City Hall. First to arrive in the morning, last one to leave. He said, quote, "We have started something special in the city of Houston. We're not going to finish it till the end of my second term."
Dominic Anthony Walsh covers city government for Houston Public Media. Dominic, thank you very much.
Thanks, Craig.
Up next, getting back to the moon will seem easy compared to building a base there and someday doing the same on Mars and, living in space or on other bodies and planets. At least Space City will keep busy trying, right? Details ahead as Houston Matters continues.
You count on Houston Public Media. That's why you're here right now. Take the next step and become a new member today. Every gift makes a difference. And with a gift of $5 a month or more, you'll receive PBS Passport, a member benefit that lets you stream more of the shows you love anytime. It only takes a minute to make a big difference. Join as a new member today at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate or call 800-364-8300.
Entertainers and athletes pursuing talent-based immigration options. More at fosterglobal.com. U.S. and global immigration services.
We get support from members like you and from Baylor College of Medicine with 125 years of innovation behind it. Baylor has driven progress in health and medicine through research, education, and care that push the frontiers of modern science. 96 for the high, 917.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Earlier this year, Artemis II carried Americans around the moon for the first time in decades. Returning to the moon is part of a larger plan to establish a long-term human presence on the lunar surface and to eventually do the same on Mars. While such a vision may make it sound like space colonization's right around the corner, there is still a lot we just don't know about how living in space on the moon or on Mars long-term will affect human beings. Rice University biology professor Scott Solomon's been thinking a lot about it. He digs into the subject in his book, Becoming Martian, How Living in Space Will Change Our Bodies and Minds. In February, he explained how, while we've had humans on the International Space Station for years, some for as long as a year, he's been thinking about much longer term than that.
Well, I think that is the eventual goal, right? So the record is currently 437 days is the most that a single person has spent continuously in space. That was on the Russian space station Mir. But yeah, the International Space Station, as you said, it's been continuously occupied since 2000. So in a sense, the entire 21st century so far, we have had humans living in space. Not the same humans, but, somebody's been up there.
So there are, and we've been able to identify some impacts, primarily temporary, I think, for those who have lived a year or more in space. We talk about how, when they land, they're a little taller briefly, things
That's right.
like that.
Yeah.
What don't we know about how living in space or on the moon or Mars for years and years, maybe decades, maybe an entire lifetime could affect us?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. So, for example, one of the more famous studies of what happens to a human body in space was when astronaut Scott Kelly spent about a year on the International Space Station. And this was really kind of a cool study because Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona, is his twin brother, also a former astronaut, and he stayed on Earth during that same time. So they had kind of a built-in experimental control. And they did all sorts of studies to look at like what exactly was happening. But here's the thing. The International Space Station is in low Earth orbit. So we think about it as being, really far up. It's in space. It's about 250 miles up. But it's actually still close enough to Earth that it's inside of the magnetosphere. That's the protective magnetic field that surrounds our planet. And it actually shields us from a lot of the more intense forms of radiation that are deeper in space. So when we go to the moon, as the Artemis II astronauts are about to do, they're going beyond the magnetosphere. They're going into the parts of space that have that really intense radiation. And we just don't have as much information about what that kind of radiation does to the body.
Also, when we talk about the moon and we talk about Mars, we need to talk about gravity.
That's right.
While I think most people understand what gravity means on Earth and understand that in outer space, you're in 0G, no gravity. The moon has about 1/6, I think it is, of the Earth's gravity. Mars has about 1/3.
Yep.
What could that mean long term if somebody lives under those conditions for years and years?
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the really important things that we need to better understand. Because here's the thing, with radiation, there are ways that you can protect people from radiation exposure. So if we're going to be spending a long amount of time on the moon or on Mars, one of the easiest ways to shield people is just to go underground, to just pile up some of the regolith, the sort of soil on top of your habitat, and that'll block a lot of the radiation. But the gravity, that's a much harder problem to solve. You can't easily make artificial gravity. And the thing is that, as you pointed out, the astronauts that go to the International Space Station, most of our experience with having people in space has been in a weightless environment. We say 0G, it's not technically no gravity, but that's what the body is experiencing. And that 1/6 G on the moon is, of course, more than a weightless experience, but it's not as much as a 1G Earth gravity. And we actually don't know that much about partial gravity, about what happens between 0 and 1G. And we know, very little about 1/3 G. So that's one of the things that I point out in my new book, is that we actually need a lot more science on partial gravity to know what that will do to people.
Well, and what that will do to people under a variety of circumstances, some of which we can predict, some of which we can't. One, I think we could probably predict. If we're talking about decades, potentially, if we're talking about colonizing Mars, for instance, or long-term space travel to there or anywhere, and you're talking about years and years in space. For that to work, you kind of have to have kids in space.
That's right.
How does something like that affect pregnancy?
Oh, my gosh. So I think this is the potential showstopper for plans to actually live on the moon or Mars or anywhere in deep space. Because the reality is that we have very little information about how human reproduction would work in that lower gravity environment, higher radiation environment, all of the extremes of being out there in space. There have been some studies looking at animals on the International Space Station and going back to the space shuttle days. There have been some studies on fish, some on amphibians, a little bit of work with rodents, but not enough for us to really be able to say, yes, reproduction in space is possible, or even to say, well, there's some challenges and these are the specific challenges. We actually really know very little about that. So pregnancy, as you pointed out, is a question. Childbirth is a question. And then child development, right? I mean, what happens to, we know that the astronauts in space, they start to lose bone density at a rate of about 1.5 to 2% bone density per month in space. That's a healthy adult. what happens to a child's growing body as they're building their skeleton? And is, again, 1/3 gravity on Mars or 1/6 gravity on the moon, is that enough for a child to fully form their skeleton or not? And if not, does that mean that a child born out there in space on the moon or on Mars would not ever be able to come back to Earth? I think we need to know that before it makes sense for us to start thinking about having kids there.
It sounds to me like we have lots and lots and lots of questions and very few answers.
Well, you're not wrong. I do try in the book to sort of say, here's what we know. And I try to also show how we know it. So I, went to the places where all the research is happening and try to kind of describe what that process is like, meet the people who are doing this research and tell their stories. But I also try to be very clear about what do we not know. And you're absolutely right that there are a lot of still unanswered questions. But then there's things that we can do by, essentially applying what we know about something that happens on Earth to think about how it could happen out in space.
Can you give some examples?
Absolutely. So I start to think about this from my perspective as an evolutionary biologist. That's my training. I did my dissertation research on the evolutionary origins of biodiversity in the Amazon basin, and I've worked on islands in the Pacific. And I think that we can apply what we know about evolutionary biology, especially on islands, to thinking about evolutionary changes that could happen to people living on the islands out there in space that we call planets. And so, there's things like species tend to change size when they're isolated on islands for long amounts of time. So you can think about Galapagos tortoises getting larger, or there's a lot of examples of types of elephants that got smaller. We got pygmy elephants because they were isolated on an island environment. So perhaps we could predict that future generations of Martians would actually be smaller. And there's other examples of that I get into in the book, but I try to essentially say, here's the things that we know happen in evolution when an organism is living in a isolated, extreme environment, and apply that to what could happen out there in space.
How quickly could that evolution take place?
Yeah, we tend to think of evolution as being a very slow process. But we actually now know that it can happen faster. And there's a couple of things that control kind of how fast evolution happens. One is basically like how different is the environment, right? So if you move into a much different environment from where you came from, then that tends to make natural selection operate in a faster way. The other is how much variation does natural selection have to work with, right? Natural selection can't make new variety. It can just sort through what's already there. And this is where I think actually radiation exposure becomes relevant again, because we know radiation causes damage to DNA. That can lead to mutations. Mutations are the raw material that natural selection actually can work with. So in a way, being out there in that high radiation environment could actually kickstart evolution and cause it to happen much faster than what we're used to thinking about here on Earth.
What might that look like?
Yeah, so that's the fun part of kind of it. It's very speculative. I get into some examples in the book about, there's ways in which you could imagine humans evolving to have larger heads, for example, because we were talking about pregnancy and childbirth earlier. There's a lot of scenarios in which childbirth becomes much riskier in a low-gravity environment, right? Think about having weakened bones, right? Mm. And so perhaps all births start to be via C-section. That actually frees up the head to become larger because it doesn't have to fit through the birth canal anymore. So, you can think through like the logic of evolution and how we know it works to make kind of informed predictions about what could happen to future generations.
You're an evolutionary biologist. You're focused quite a bit on physical impacts, understandably so. Those are one thing. Psychological impacts are another. What are some of the questions that you're contemplating about how life in space or on the moon or on Mars might impact the human mind?
I think this is a really important thing to think about because, we know that going out into space has a profound psychological and emotional impact on people. I mean, astronauts talk about the experience of looking back at the Earth and being really transformed by it, right? You see how fragile the Earth is. You see how thin the atmosphere is. You recognize that, it's just one planet and we're all in it together. And so that's this idea known as the overview effect that really has kind of a profound generally positive impact on people. Going deeper into space, imagine being out there on Mars and looking up in the night sky and just seeing this tiny little dot, and that's Earth. And it's so far away, and maybe it actually starts to make people appreciate what a good place to live the Earth really is, right? I mean, Mars is so extreme as an environment that it will really make even the most inhospitable places on Earth, like Antarctica, seem pretty cozy. So I think, there's those kinds of effects, but I think there's also the effects of, being in a confined space with a relatively small group of people for a long amount of time. Astronauts train with the same crew members in part for, practical purposes of wanting to make sure they work together as a team. But you have to get those team dynamics right. And this is something NASA really thinks a lot about. And it's something that would be essential for being in an extreme environment very far from home and for a long period of time.
So many of us come to subject matter like this through the prism of science fiction. And so many science fiction stories, whether we're talking about books or TV or film or beyond, they kind of yada their way through a lot of the questions that you're asking. Is there anything out there in terms of science fiction that you'd point to and say, they may be closing in on getting it right?
Yeah, actually, I think a lot of science fiction has really done the hard work of thinking through what's possible, right? And sometimes it's creative and fun, and sometimes it's pretty well based on scientific principles. So I'm a big fan of The Expanse. That's a series that I think one of the things that they got right about it is the idea that people living in a lower gravity environment, in this case, the Belters are one of the groups of people who are living out there in space, and they have evolved to have kind of long, thin bodies and weaker bones. And so the idea of gravity torture plays a role in that story because people from the asteroid belt coming to Earth, Earth's gravity is essentially crushing them. And that's something that I think we would have to really understand if that would be the case for people living out there on the moon or Mars. But I also want to mention one of the oldest examples of science fiction, and that is H.G. Wells. He wrote this story, War of the Worlds, back in 1898. And, so spoiler alert if you haven't, if you're not familiar with the story, but it's been out for a while. So
yeah, I think you're safe.
But, in that story, you have Martians coming and basically attacking the Earth, and their technology is so superior and we can't stop them. But what ultimately stops them is bacteria. Earth's microorganisms. They have no defense against it. And I think that was actually a really forward-thinking idea because I actually really worry quite a bit about the role of microorganisms in making it challenging for people to be able to easily move between planets. We will only have the microbes that we take with us when we go to the moon or Mars. And so a child born in that environment, they would never be exposed to the vast diversity of microbes that we have here on Earth that our immune systems are kind of trained to be able to deal with without it being a big deal.
In light of all of this, how far away are we really from colonizing Mars? Are we talking decades, centuries, millennia? Where would you put it?
So that's the thing, and this was part of my motivation for writing this book, is that, we are at a moment when people are actively working towards trying to make that happen soon, right? Elon Musk is saying we're going to have a self-growing city on the moon within 10 years and one on Mars within, 20 to 30.
Well, he says a lot of things.
Yeah, his timing is something that people are often skeptical of. But I think we need to be cautious about moving forward. I'm calling for us to keep doing the science, keep doing the exploration, but the idea of actually living there and having settlements where people are raising families, that's something I think that we need to hold off on until we really understand what the consequences would be for future generations born out there.
That's Scott Solomon, a professor of biology at Rice University. He's the author of Becoming Martian, How Living in Space Will Change Our Bodies and Minds. We spoke in February. Just ahead, kids these days are drinking less. Alcohol, I mean. It's a good thing, right? So are we seeing a meaningful change in Houstonians' health? We discuss as Houston Matters continues on News 88.7 and YouTube.
Hello, I'm Ernie Manous, and
It's not just your car. It's the one that brought your kids home from school, took you cross-country, held memories, laughter, even a few breakdowns. When it's time to let go, give your car a new purpose. Donate it and turn memories into meaningful support for this station. Plus, you'll enjoy free and easy pickup, potential tax benefits, and a simple donation process. Your gift supports the programs you and your family love. Donate today and help keep public media strong. Call or donate online.
Legendary performers gather to celebrate America on Red, White, and Rock. Enjoy Tommy James and the Shondells, The Four Tops, The Miracles, and more tonight at 7 on TV8.
Houston Public Media is licensed to the University of Houston system, governed by the UH Board of Regents. Information about open meetings, dates, times, and locations is online at uhsystem.edu.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Many teens across the country are gearing up to go to college for the first time, and not an insignificant number of them inevitably will find themselves at their first college party, where there will be lots of alcohol. Drinking and partying have long been associated with the college experience, for better or worse, but how much of that is changing? Alcohol consumption has been trending downward in recent years. So, are we seeing fewer instances of alcohol-related health issues and behavior like driving under the influence, especially among younger people here in Greater Houston? Let's talk it over now with two guests. Dr. Michael Weaver, professor and medical director of the Center for Neurobehavioral Research on Addictions at UT Health Houston, and Blake Mudd, assistant professor in global retailing and consumer science at the University of Houston. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Blake, what are the current trends with alcohol consumption?
We definitely are seeing that younger consumers especially are consuming alcohol at a lower level than maybe previous generations. It doesn't necessarily mean that Gen Z is not drinking at all, but maybe they're drinking in more moderation than in previous generations.
Is that behavioral? Is that a market-driven thing? A little bit of both?
Yes to all. It's definitely a complicated environment for the alcohol industry to really meet this interesting demand that tends to go up and down. But again, it's just a very complicated kind of environment for them.
Are we just seeing it in terms of younger people, just in terms of an age breakdown, or any other demographics that stick out to you?
Yeah, and definitely, Gen Z keeps getting marketed as this generation that isn't drinking, but we also don't know what Gen Z is going to be doing when they're, in their 40s and 50s. So it isn't necessarily that this generation is taking a break from drinking at all. They're just drinking a bit less than their previous counterparts.
Dr. Weaver, what are some common health-related issues that tend to stem from alcohol consumption?
Oh, there are lots of different issues that can come from drinking excessively. Mental health issues are foremost among those: depression, anxiety, and using it as a maladaptive way to cope with stressful situations, such as what we saw with the pandemic recently. And then physical health is certainly myriad. Now, name an organ or a body system, and I'll tell you something that alcohol can do to it that you won't like, from things like speeding up the development of dementia to problems with stomach and digestion to liver failure that we hear about.
Are we seeing any kinds of decreases in those issues tied to lower alcohol consumption, or is this a trend that's a little bit too new a phenomenon to see that?
Well, what happened was that during the COVID-19 pandemic, rates of alcohol consumption went up. People were at home, they were worried about the future, and they were drinking more. So we saw more consequences as a result of that, from depression and anxiety to health consequences, even legal consequences like DUI. Those have started to come down, fortunately, but not to the same level as before the pandemic.
The greater concern that we tend to see this time of year is with kids attending college for the first time. They end up at that first, frat party or what have you, and there's binge drinking. And somebody, God, how many years do we have to go through the experience of, we hear about somebody sent off to the hospital, somebody dies because they drank an outrageously excessive amount of alcohol, didn't realize they were doing it, nobody else was checking on them, being careful with them. Are we seeing decreases in that, or is that a phenomenon that regardless of any other health trends, is likely to continue?
Well, it depends on what segment of the population you're looking at. So there are going to be some college students that are more likely to experiment, but then there is a growing sober curious movement where they see these embarrassing consequences. They see people who have Facebook posts that were better not posted, or they recognize that people are gaining weight, having trouble losing weight, or are just not as healthy, and they don't want those consequences. So they choose to drink less, or they choose to have alternative beverages. Mocktails are certainly growing in popularity now.
Yeah, Blake, are alcohol producers advertising products differently and pursuing different kinds of products?
Definitely. I think you used to, let's say you were manufacturing beer, if you might have thought that your competition was just another beer brand, and instead now you're competing with non-alcoholic beverages. Maybe you're competing with THC seltzers. It's a very different environment. The competition is even more tough than it ever has been.
Is it just the products and marketing and all of that, or the culture surrounding drinking? How's that changing?
Definitely. You mentioned sober curious as a very interesting phenomenon. We're seeing things like Dry January coming up. It isn't just, okay, if you're a young college student, you're not saying, what are we drinking tonight? It's the weekend. You're now saying, what are we going to do tonight? Does it involve drinking at all? So it's a very interesting consumption shift that we're seeing.
I imagine this also means that lots of bars and clubs have to think differently about how they're catering to this generation that is a little less inclined to drink as much.
Definitely, and I think that that's where you're seeing them offering other types of events. Maybe there's going to be a cover charge because they're going to be doing some really fun activity. Maybe they're going to be doing theme nights to encourage people to come in. Maybe they're going to start offering food. They're really trying to diversify that revenue stream to accommodate just less drinking.
Dr. Weaver, how about in the medical world? Have conversations changed when it comes to alcohol in terms of either how and when and how often it's being treated, or how you broach the conversation with patients, things like that?
I think that we've moved towards a more kinder, gentler approach, less judgmental. And as a medical field, there's more recognition that we need to help people make appropriate decisions, something we call motivational interviewing, helping people decide what's important to them, and then recognizing that alcohol may play a role in that, and that it may be good to make healthier choices around reducing or avoiding alcohol.
You mentioned, though, earlier that things like social media posts that suggest to someone, oh, maybe I shouldn't be drinking because I'm either seeing the after effects for somebody else or I'm being shamed as a result of something I went through. Does any of that make you think, well, maybe we shouldn't be quite so gentle about it because a little bit of public shaming seemed to get the job done? Or is that maybe its own problem?
Well, when people feel shamed, they react in different ways. And so one of those ways may be to cope by numbing your feelings by drinking, and it can seem self-defeating. But that's part of the illogic of drinking. It can take over our mind's usual defense mechanisms, and we have a hard time putting on the brakes because drinking certainly fills a need, and it's doing something that people see as positive as well as negative, and it's okay to be ambivalent. Most people are ambivalent about a lot of things. What we want to try to do is take advantage of that ambivalence, and as a medical professional, I try to help people to come down on the side of being healthier, recognizing the consequences of drinking, and ways to drink less.
Is it clear, and this is really a question for both of you, whether or not this trend that we're seeing towards at least some within this younger generation drinking less, whether that is an effort to avoid all addictive substances or it's simply replacing alcohol with something else? Because, Blake, like you mentioned, THC products is a good example of that. Is it clear which way we're going here in terms of the trends?
The American consumer is really complicated. The American consumer, I think everyone can agree, loves a vice, whether that's drinking, whether that's some other substance. I don't necessarily think that they are going to see this as a very long-term shift, personally. I generally think that we're going to see this really interesting shift as we watch Gen Z get older, as we see Gen Alpha age into of his drinking age. I can't predict it, obviously, with as complicated as an American consumer is, but I don't necessarily think that this is a very long-term kind of overall American cultural shift.
Well, what are we seeing in the Houston area, the Texas Medical Center, in terms of, if there may be some fewer instances of alcohol poisoning or DUI or what have you, and I'm not sure that necessarily that's the case, are we seeing more instances of drug overdoses, more instances of other addictive substances creating health hazards?
Well, in the addiction world, we say everything old is new again. So as something falls out of favor because people recognize that it has consequences, there are new substances or new ways of marketing other substances to take their place. It's a market economy. There's competition. There is profit to be made. And so there's always going to be something, and people are always willing to try to alter their mood with a chemical to avoid dealing with difficult feelings.
Blake didn't want to necessarily, use the crystal ball and predict out lots of years, but let me ask you, as you contemplate this long term, could we see different health outcomes, some degree of optimism that declining alcohol consumption, at least again within one portion of one generation, might mean better health outcomes overall in the long term?
I agree. As the Sober Curious movement, if it grows, then we'll see in the future that there are fewer consequences, mental health and physical health, even legal consequences, as people drink less. So that's a good thing. But we also have to apply that to other substances. We know about the opioid crisis that's still going on. Overdose deaths have reduced slightly, but overdoses are still occurring. And then, of course, with cannabis products, there's a lot of different responses to that. And because it's been decriminalized or made available for medical use in a variety of states, then the perception of harm has also been reduced. So more people and more younger people are trying things like that. In fact, recently there were trends towards people having more cannabis use on a daily basis than alcohol use.
Do we also make a mistake in fixating so much on trends and not recognizing that there, in every generation, will always be people who are using substances in ways they should not, and some of what we're talking about in terms of health outcomes, the extremes are always going to be there. There's always going to be people who have many, many DUIs, who experience alcohol poisoning, or people whose livers are pickled because of it, who have terrible health outcomes because of all of this.
Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of truth in that there will be outliers who have those kinds of consequences. That doesn't mean they're not salvageable. We should certainly reach out and try to help everybody, even if it seems like it might be an impossible task, because it's still worthwhile, even if we save one individual from those kinds of harms.
Blake, you think this is a temporary trend, and we look back a few years from now and say, okay, well, that was fun, but no, we're kind of back to where we were before.
Yeah, I mean, we see this economic shift that's happening where maybe people aren't wanting to spend as much money with their discretionary income specifically on alcohol. Maybe they're choosing another substance. Maybe they're choosing to spend their discretionary income on different consumer products. But yes, I generally don't think that this is going to be some big cultural shift. American consumers have loved alcohol for generations among generations. I don't see that really shifting too much.
And your point about the economics of it all, when it comes to any products, as we've seen prices rise, that as much as anything can be the trigger that causes people to say, well, I can dial back on this or that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're at a restaurant and you're seeing, oh gosh, a cocktail's going to cost me $20, maybe I don't need to drink with my meal tonight,
Blake Mudd is an assistant professor in global retailing and consumer science at the University of Houston. Dr. Michael Weaver is a professor and medical director of the Center for Neurobehavioral Research on Addictions at UT Health Houston. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
And still to come, World Cup fever's ended, but soccer remains a fixture for many communities in Houston, as a documentary in the works hopes to highlight. Details ahead as Houston Matters continues on News 88.7 and YouTube.
I'm Nikki Hurd, and I'm a poet. A poem begins because there's something that keeps gnawing at me that says, I want you to write about this, blah, blah, blah. I want you to write about the time when your grandmother said she was at an Elvis concert, or I want you to write about what it means to be a girl, or I want you to write about, what's going on in the world with the political divide that we're in right now. It's something that keeps gnawing in me, viscerally. The ideal comes, and I write whatever it is that's in my head on the back of a receipt, or like I just got a ticket this morning for parking. I'll write something on the back of that, and it seems to work for me. Poetry is important for me because I feel like it's really the only tool, to use a light word, but really weapon that I have to articulate the world the way I see it. Simple as that. This poem is called Girl. I think it was just a moment when I was at a low point, looking up to some women figures for guidance, and they really weren't there in ways that I needed them to be. It was really at that moment when I discovered that poetry, that was what I had. That was my weapon. My sister was also, her and her husband were trying to get pregnant. And so I envisioned that I was writing this to my niece. Girl, find one thing to love inside yourself. Carry it like a gun in guerrilla hands. And when government defeats you, mountains fall, lovers leave, and the words of women before come crashing to the ground. Hold this love between your hands. Sing its name like the alphabet. And shoot, woman, shoot. I'm poet Nikki Hurd, and you're listening to Houston Matters.
Houston Public Media in partnership.
We know you value Houston Public Media. That's why you're watching right now. So take the next step and become a new member of the station you rely on. Every gift makes a difference. And what matters most right now is supporting the station that brings you the news and information you rely on. It only takes a minute to make a big difference. So join as a new member today at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate or call 800-364-8300.
On by things musically that inspired him.
Hear Neil Young, Writer's Favorites, coming here real soon.
Saturday evening at 7 on News 88.7.
Support comes from the University of Houston Law Center, with 4 programs ranked among the top 15 law school programs by U.S. News and World Report, including intellectual property law. More at law.uh.edu.
While the FIFA World Cup has come and gone from Houston, the spirit of the game of soccer lives on in many area neighborhoods and in schools and in youth programs all around the region. A pair of local filmmakers are setting out to document Houston's soccer culture thanks to a National Endowment of the Arts grant and support from the Houston Arts Alliance and Houston Cinema Arts Society. Christian and Orlando Briones are filmmakers who started their own production company called Filmatic, and they join us now. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
What do you hope to capture with this documentary?
Man, culture.
Yeah.
Culture. So one of the things I tell people is like, how do you know? Somebody asked me, how do you know it's going to be from Houston? It's just soccer. I'm like, have you ever eaten a really good meal from somewhere, but you know your mom makes it much better? And when you eat your mom's meal, you're like, this is my mom's food.
Right.
That's how I want them to feel about this documentary. Like, oh, that's Houston. Like that proudness you feel in your chest. They're like, you know what? We can make cool stuff here. Like that's what I want them to feel, because the game is about passion. It's one of the simplest games you could play. Literally, if you get a couple guys, the title that we have is Cascarita, which is the smallest form of the game. That's what guys who are in like a paint shop will play during lunch. It's like, hey, you want to go outside? I got a ball. Una cascarita?
Yep.
That's the smallest form of the game, and that's what we want to capture: the passion, the flavor, and the culture of that form of the game.
You could capture that anywhere, really, across Greater Houston, but are there some specific spots, neighborhoods, locations, you're like, oh, when we do this, we definitely need to film here?
Well, I think, a lot of that has to do with how we grew up and where we grew up in, because, we grew up in the north side of Houston. We're from Acres Homes, but we would work a lot in the north side of Houston near Cross Timbers area, going to church there. After church, we'd play soccer. Once they got old enough, they started also playing soccer in that little north side area. So that was something that we immediately went back to. But everyone that was there, they're also spread out everywhere. And now you're visiting A-Leaf. I'm
visiting A-Leaf. I'm visiting Northside, which is the same where we grew up, our old stomping grounds. But I'm also visiting other forms of it, like indoor female teams, because we want to see people whose goals, whose greatest sporting achievements will never be recorded. They will never be remembered except for that person in their mind and their dreams. They're like, hey, do you remember the greatest sports achievement? It's like, yeah, nobody was there. It was just me and a group of guys, and I scored the greatest goal of my life.
Yeah, where were you when I was tending goal at Conway Elementary? Come on.
Exactly.
Come on, that was world class. So what is your relationship to soccer? Beyond, you mentioned church, but where else, when else? Has always been a part of your life?
I'm gonna tell you the truth. I told my brother, and I tell people that if I wasn't a filmmaker, I would actively push myself to go for a coaching license if I could.
Okay.
I love the game. I think of it like chess. Like, it's an ever-evolving game of chess that the other person is constantly evolving, and I just love it so much that that's how I meet so many people. I meet somebody, they're like, oh, I'm from London. I was like, what part? I was like, Craven Cottage, yeah, that's where Fulham plays, right? Like, yeah. They're like, how'd you know that? I was like, dude, that's how you know people. It's like you learn their team from their city.
When you are not just a fan and a player and have that mindset all the time. I have it with hockey. It's the same kind of thing. That it's sort of all-encompassing. Yeah. Orlando, you've also found a way to incorporate soccer and your respective love of it with the work that you do, not just in this documentary, but you all were shooting for the World Cup as well, right?
Yeah. We submitted for the World Cup to go film with. We filmed with Lay's during that time, and we dropped a lot of things that are on the FIFA World Cup Instagram page. If you check it out, a lot of the top ones that were pushed out there, we actually filmed them, and that was pretty cool. That our work gets to be seen by everyone. But before that, we followed around the Bundesliga, the German soccer league. We followed them around. Did a tour here in United States. We also filmed with Frankfurt, with BVB Dortmund. Yeah, we filmed. We did a lot of high profiles with different players like Christian, like Pulisic.
Yeah, Mexican national team players.
Yeah, so
German national team players. Yeah.
So we already got kind of bridged the gap of like doing film for everyone else, and we're like, why can't we just do it at home? Actually sleep in our own beds and go tell our own stories. So we're super excited that. They chose us to be able to create something really cool here.
Yeah, Christian, how are the Houston Arts Alliance and Houston Cinema Arts Society playing a role in this project?
Oh man, my first instance with them is when I saw their post talking about it. I was like, oh, that's my bread and butter. I went in, and since we got it, man, they have been so helpful. They've been like the entire time. They're trying to get us connects where we can't get connects, because the whole point of this is a collaboration. I mean, I don't have the connections that you may have, but if we're good enough friends that we have a common goal, you'll be like, you know what? I can probably find that for you. And Houston Arts Alliance has been killing it with that. So,
Christian Briones is director and writer. Orlando Briones, cinematographer and producer for the production company Filmatic. Hey, when do you think the documentary will be ready? Any idea?
Yeah, I think the idea here is that we'll be previewing it and showing it off in December, like late November, early December. I think we'll have it for the showing.
Excellent. Yep. Looking forward to that. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that will do it for today's show. The Houston Matters team includes Michael Haggerty, Joshua Zinn, Brenda Valdivia, and Mincho Jacob. Jared Carroll's our technical director. On tomorrow's show, we contemplate intrigues in the news on the good, the bad, and the ugly. Also, our Brenda Valdivia chats with comedian Ron Funches, who just brought his stand-up to Houston last weekend. I'm Craig Cohen. Join us tomorrow for those and other Houston Matters.
Power outages are inconvenient at best.